Let's talk about B9 with Dr. B. Anything B9 has to be good, right? In this episode, I'll be talking about folate or folic acid. This is one part of a 3-part series covering all of the B vitamins. Check out the other 2 episodes, one on vitamins B1 through B7, and a separate one just on vitamin B12. There's a lot of information on folate, some genetics, a couple different forms, and a good amount of controversy.
Alrighty then.
Let's start off with a little history. Folic acid was first identified by Dr. Lucy Wills as a blood-building factor found in liver and yeast. Originally called Wills factor. It wasn't until 1943-45 when it got the folic acid name. Folate, in case you didn't catch it, is also called vitamin B9. One quick note on terminology before we move on. Folate comes in 2 forms. We'll call one folic acid and the other methylfolate. The full names are pteroyl monoglutamic acid and 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate, often abbreviated as 5-MTHF. Yeah, so we'll stick with folic acid and methylfolate. Folate may be the most controversial of all of the B vitamins. Folate in foods comes as a chain of varying lengths. The most common form in the blood is the methylfolate form. Folate is involved with DNA synthesis and conversions between amino acids. Folate is available in the 2 forms I mentioned, folic acid and 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate, 5-MTHF, or again, just methylfolate. Folic acid is the most common form of folate in supplements and fortified foods and has been in that position for many decades. However, it rarely occurs naturally in foods. Only recently has the methylfolate form been available as a supplement, though it is still very expensive. On that note, if you're taking a cheap methylfolate, you're probably getting folic acid or something else entirely. Doing some quick math using rough 2024 costs, if you're paying less than $10 for 30 1,000 microgram pills, you're not getting true methylfolate or you're not getting the amount stated on the label. A reliable product is probably going to be closer to $20 for a month's supply. Before we get too deep into the folate woods, we need to step to the side a bit and talk about the MTHFR gene. This particular gene is for an enzyme that converts other forms of folate into the methyl form, among other things. There are 2 major genetic variants in this gene that are worth talking about. I'll call one the 677 variant and the other the 1298 variant. Now remember, you have 2 copies of each gene, one from mom and one from dad. Each of these copies may carry 0, 1, or both variants. Still with me?
What?
Now I'm not calling these mutations, which you may have heard elsewhere, because we simply don't know if they are mutations or just simply different versions of the gene. At least in the US, there are roughly equal numbers of people with each of these variants. Between 30 and 40% of the world carries 1 copy of the 677 variant. About half those numbers carry 2 copies of this variant. The variants are less common in other ethnicities and lowest in blacks. The numbers are lower for the 1298 variant. Only about 7 to 14% of people have at least 1 copy, even less for Asians, Hispanics, and Chinese. You can, of course, carry 2 copies of both variants. If you carry 1 copy of the 677 variant, then your ability to process folate is reduced by about 35%. 70% if you carry 2 copies. 70% is a big number, yet even with that big of a reduction in enzyme activity, people with 2 copies of the 677 variant only show blood folate levels 16% lower than those with 0 copies of this variant. This is perhaps a testament to your body's ability to adapt and compensate. There's a lot more here we could get into. I'm just sticking with the most basic aspects surrounding folate. There are effects outside of folate metabolism, and each of these variants may also have long-term health implications, though adequate supplementation is thought to mitigate at least some of these risks. Keep in mind, there's a lot of unknowns here. Genetic variation is still a relatively young science, and as I said earlier, methylfolate supplementation in research is even younger. Now let's go through some of the newer research on methylfolate and talk about when and with whom methylfolate makes sense. I'll cover some negative associations with high blood folic acid levels and where we currently sit with recommendations from major health organizations regarding folate supplementation and all this genetic mess. There is one area where supplementation with methylfolate appears to be very beneficial. That is for couples having trouble with conception. And this applies equally to both men and women in this situation. Several of these studies show that supplementation with 400 to 800 micrograms of methylfolate for 3 months was able to yield a viable pregnancy in couples who failed to conceive even with a similar duration of taking as much as 5 milligrams of folic acid. That's more than 5,000 times the folic acid, though not all research found a difference. Additionally, there are some very rare MTHFR variants where methylfolate supplementation is damn near essential. Beyond these two situations, the research does not show as dramatic an advantage for methylfolate over folic acid. Yet, there is still at least a small advantage. Let's talk briefly about unmetabolized folic acid. This is the folic acid in your blood that is in excess of what your body needs or can convert to the methylfolate form. There are a few studies which report ill health in persons with high levels of excess folic acid. It's important here that we not assign cause and effect. These are observational studies, just watching what goes on. It could be that those who take large folic acid doses also do something else, or several somethings else, that contribute to this ill health. So far, there are no studies directly linking these ill effects to excess folic acid consumption. One attempt at proving this failed to find a direct link between excess folic acid and breast cancer risk. Additionally, at least one study found similar ill health effects in persons with excess blood methylfolate. Probably the best advice here is to avoid taking too much folate in any form. Somewhere between 800 and 1,000 micrograms daily appears to be the safest dose. As for which form is better, earlier research could not agree on whether one form was better than the other. However, more recent research found the two forms to be more or less equally effective, maybe a slight advantage to methylfolate. Now, all the major health organizations, the WHO, CDC, the American Heart Association, just to name a few, only recommend the use of folic acid. None of them currently recommend the use of methylfolate. Take that however you like. I realize there's a fair bit of distrust for such organizations, and these groups are usually the last folks to make changes to their recommendations. It usually takes more than a decade of strong research to get any of these organizations to change. With methylfolate being so new, it'll be several more years before these organizations take notice. So, what's the take-home message here? If it's in your budget to buy a methylfolate product, then do so. It's the biological form, appears to have a greater potential, and is at least a little bit better for most people than plain old folic acid. Remember, don't go cheap here, as you'll probably just be overpaying for folic acid or not getting what it says on the label. Methylfolate is also less stable than folic acid, so avoid older bottles, those with shelf lives beyond 2 years, or from less reputable companies. Again, you could be paying extra for plain old folic acid or a bunch of empty pills in a fancy bottle. If you're a little short on funds, then taking a little more folic acid is not a bad option and will probably be fine for most people. If you have one or more of the MTHFR variants, then taking the methylfolate form is probably the wiser decision, though it's hard to quantify just how much better it might be for you, unless you're one of the unlucky few with some of the rarer variants or are trying to conceive, whether male or female. In the end, the methylfolate form is probably better for most people. It's just hard to say how much better. No matter which form you choose, you should also know that folate, like all B vitamins, has a dedicated absorption pathway. This pathway is pretty easy to saturate. This means that once you saturate the pathway, your body dramatically reduces what it can absorb. Bottom line, this means if you want to get the most from your choice of folate, then take it in smaller doses throughout the day. If you take large doses all at once, then most of what you're paying for is literally being flushed down the toilet. What's the best way to do that? Eat healthy foods all day long. If you choose to supplement, then do it in divided doses with appropriate forms. Boom. Knowledge supplemented. Thanks for watching. All my references for this video are in the description below. This is not a comprehensive bibliography, just enough to cover the bases. Use these to help guide any additional study. Make sure you check out the other 2 videos in this series and let me know what other topics you'd like covered in the comments. Liking and subscribing helps me out and lets me know which topics are the most valuable to you all. See you next time.